in the business world, of course, if you don't adapt, your business fails because your shareholders give up on you and they're not going to get their investment. In our case, our shareholders are called our citizens. And if they can't get care that's good quality when they need it, where they need it, that's a failure of the business, right? So you kind of have to do it. If you're in the mission business, which we all are, that's mission, you know? So it's still the same motivator.
Welcome, Dr. Khayat, to the Business and Medicine podcast. So I first heard Dr. Khayat speak at the Delta Health Innovation Conference hosted 2 weekends ago, I believe. She gave a brilliant talk on alternative careers in medicine, and I thought that'd be a great episode. So Dr. Khayat completed her undergraduate studies in biochemistry at the University of Windsor, followed by her PhD in biochemistry from the University of Toronto at the Hospital for Sick Children, where she was a scholar of the Canadian Institute of Health Research, studying how insulin and exercise regulate blood glucose in the muscle, and why and where this process breaks down during disease states such as diabetes. From 2001 to 2010, Dr. Khayat was a principal with the Toronto office of the Boston Consulting Group, and then became an associate partner with Secor Consulting from 2010 to 2012. Where she worked with medium and large size public and private health and life sciences organizations on issues of strategy and management. Dr. Khayat previously co-founded and led the Futures team at the National Home Health and Aging not-for-profit at St. Elizabeth Health, a health and social impact enterprise with a major focus on creating a better future for aging adults in their homes and communities. From 2014 to 2017, Dr. Khayat led health system innovation with Mars Discovery District, a major innovation hub based in Toronto, where her and her team helped smooth the path to adoption of innovation by the healthcare systems in Ontario and around the world. Dr. Khayat is an adjunct faculty member with the Rotman School of Management in the Health Sector Strategy stream, where she teaches the Health MBA course on healthcare innovation. Currently, Dr. Khayat is the VP of Business Development and Strategy with Teladoc Health, which is a Canadian company that aims to provide a new kind of healthcare experience with greater convenience, outcomes, and values using an integrated virtual care system. So quite an impressive resume, and thank you again for being on the podcast. So you have a very interesting background. It started very research heavy, doing the PhD in biochemistry, and then your career ventures kind of led to more healthcare innovation within the business world. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more about what made you kind of change these career.
I mean, I think first, and probably a lot of your listeners can relate, I was like, a smart child of immigrants in the 90s or 80s or whatever. And of course, my family wanted me to be a doctor. So I studied biology and got really good grades. And I got in, I think, 3 or 4 medical schools. And then, through the interview process, I realized I absolutely had no desire to heal anybody physically, emotionally, or any other way. So it was probably the first time I had to be honest with myself, because it's, as you know, a big leap. But then I really didn't know what I was going to do. I just had really good grades. I had a lot of money backing me because I was a female in science. And back then, the federal government had a lot of support for that if you did postgraduate studies. So, of course, when you don't know what you want to do after school, what do? More schools. So off I went to do my doctorate at U of T. I mean, really, because I was okay at it. I don't think I ever dreamed of being a scientist. I just, didn't know what I wanted to do. And it's, a PhD in the life sciences, at least in North America, they pay you to go. So, I wasn't going to incur more debt. I was quite poor growing up. Anyway, so I bought some time. Of course, there's something about solving really messy scientific problem I was drawn to in the medical kind of roughly realm, although I was doing basic science. Anyway, 3 years in, I realized I did not want to be a scientist. And back then, the only path was you either went to work for pharma and R&D, or you became a prof, and an academic. There was really nothing else talked about. But I didn't really want either of those. And there was just the turn of the .com, like 99, 2000, when the world was modernizing with e-commerce. And so the top tier strategy shops like Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, they couldn't keep any MBA talent who would normally have been their pool that they would recruit from, because they were all off going to become .com billionaires. And like a $200,000 a year job, at a consulting firm all of a sudden looked awful. And so they were desperate for talent because they were growing really fast. Every business in the world needed help guiding them through this e-commerce revolution. And so they're like, who can solve messy problems in a top-down, hypothesis-driven way and has a lot of intellectual horsepower? Oh, doctors, lawyers, and scientists. So long story short, they kind of started to come onto campus at exactly the time I was looking for something very different. And just by luck, I got into Boston Consulting Group. So that was my major turning point because off I am to Bay Street, I'm using my science skills instead of solving scientific problems like, why can't a type 2 diabetic clear glucose out of their blood, to solving really, really complex organizational or business problems. But the methodologies are kind of the same. So that's how I got into that world. And then, I had an itch to still be in medicine, and my clients were really every industry because that's just the name of the game. In strategy consulting, I was working with airlines, beer companies, telcos, and so I made the move out and joined a smaller firm to get to know the Canadian health system. That was Secor. And then I really decided the problems I want to solve in the world are the intractable problems of healthcare.
I love that. I love how you took kind of the skills you got from your research background. You're able to easily translate that into the innovation. I think it's cool because I think a lot of people growing up, like their parents want them to go to school, they get the education, and really that science background is what a lot of people end up going to. But sometimes if you don't have that passion to stay in the research, it's hard to know other opportunities that you can utilize the skills that you. So I think it's awesome that you were able to take those skills into another field and really.
And also back then, nobody talked about this stuff, right? So if you didn't find somebody who got out, like all you knew and all you were mentored to do. But I mean, podcasts, this kind of podcast didn't exist. So somebody might be hearing this, and be like, maybe I can do something different. So kudos to you for having a conversation about it.
For sure. Yeah. Hopefully somebody's listening in and can relate. Yeah.
For sure. I'd just love to echo what Adrian just said. And it's great to see how you navigated the intersection between, business, healthcare, and science, and you're able to find different opportunities out there. So you mentioned briefly about your futures team that you co-founded at SE Health. I was wondering if you could chat a bit more about that and expand on why you started it.
So around the time I got recruited to SE Health, which for 112 years was known as St. Elizabeth Healthcare, a national major leader, I'd say, and pioneer in the home healthcare space. I was teaching a course in health innovation, I think for the second year at University of Toronto at the business school. And I had led the health innovation platform at Mars Discovery District, where we were helping health systems and adopt new models of care and new technology-based solutions. But and at the time, every health org, whether it's a hospital or home care or a nursing home, was creating this new role one by one, particularly in Canada, called the Chief Innovation Officer. So this really dedicated C-suite capability and function just to spend time creating the new instead of quality improving the old, which is, the heart and soul of most of medicine. But what I found is, and even in my teaching, everyone that had a chief innovation officer, an innovation office, innovation this, innovation that, at the end of the day, it wasn't actually innovation. They were mostly just digitizing a bunch of analog processes that should have been done by the business process management office. But, this is Canadian healthcare. So anything like slightly different is considered innovation and new. And so I find the word pollutes what it is. So when I got recruited to be the chief innovation officer at SE Health, I was actually living and working in Europe at the time. I said, I don't want the title innovation, because then anything that's, like, oh, can we make an app for people to schedule their appointments? They're going to give it to the innovation team. And I'm like, maybe they don't even need that appointment. How about we work on that? So anyway, the point is, I said, I want to call us the futures team. So that's how we branded it. And the idea would be to give us some protection to say we only work on next practices, not best practices, future business models, future care models, practices, policies. And so that just let us carve out a space to only work on really protecting the future and creating the future instead of protecting the past. So that's what that concept was. And so then, recruited a team, and a typical innovation team, you have some areas you want to focus on. We focused only on older adults and their experiences so they can age in the place of their choice for as long as they want to, including dying in the place of their choice. And then you do different projects that end up hopefully becoming new business models that get scaled up. So that's what we did.
Very cool. And I saw from looking at the website there that you also created a book. It's The Future of Aging. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the book and what inspired you and your team to write it.
Yeah, so I mean, we figured out pretty quickly if we're going to be the futures team to create, I think our framework or I don't know if it's our manifesto was creating a future where Canadians age with dignity, health, vitality, and agency, instead of the words we love to use, which is like sickness, death, dementia, loneliness, and pain, right? Well, we needed to have a normative view of that future, because if you create the future from what you see all day and how everyone thinks all day around the elderly population, you're going to titrate to the lowest denominator and just really not do much. So we needed to go out and do, a very significant amount of research and understanding of the signals, and certainly not in Canada. We had to look around the world of how is aging changing and being different, and not only in the health space. We looked at multiple dimensions. I think we looked at 350 signals. And then we let the data tell us what are the patterns in these signals. So we didn't design the chapters. The chapters emerged from the research. And those were 5 big themes that, were each just different lenses of the future around housing and how people live, around healthcare, around tech, around money and how people save money, spend money, leave a legacy, and then around the identity of aging, ageism, and all that. So for us, that's our Bible. Like those 5 futures is what my team would work on, and we would use the book to guide us. I used to use a metaphor like, when Christianity needed to spread, they had this thing called the Bible, as the book. But the second use was to use it as a tool to inform, educate, influence anybody in the world who wanted to work in this space. And working for a nonprofit, that was the freedom we had, that we didn't need to keep all our intelligence exclusively to ourselves, because actually we're not going to create the future of aging anyway if we think we're going to do it in the 4 walls of our organization. So it was also kind of a thought leadership piece. So, and that was fun. It was great to co-write a book. I've never done that before.
That's awesome. Yeah. And for the viewers who are interested in reading the book, we'll include the link in the podcast description as well. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very important topic with the aging population as well, and needing to find these different solutions to being able to house and provide the resources needed. Yeah.
Absolutely, Adrian. And I was just wondering, Dr. Khayat, if you've had anyone read the book and reach out to you and say to you that they've adopted those systems that you presented in the book?
I don't know if I've had that directly. I mean, it was a weird timing because the book released, I remember our launch party, February, I think it was like 20th of 2020. Trying to think of when the pandemic, and then, a month later we were shut down. We had a whole road tour planned. I was going through Europe and Asia and, all across Canada, and all of that got canceled. But I think we still did about 60 events virtually. But I will say that for a lot of people, it depends on the audiences. I've done law firms, I've done nursing home companies, pharma, I mean, you name it, in terms of talking about the book. It does validate maybe the path they're on. They just needed some sense making. Like, what's the language around what this is? How does it, people have said, it just opened their mind. And they just needed that little mindset shift to then kind of keep going. So I feel kind of proud about that. I know for us, it's been vital to keep us anchored to our kind of go north, right? Because it is just, especially during the pandemic, it's so easy to just keep going back to the issues of the day. And if you keep doing that, you're just never going to break through, which is a great segue probably for a conversation about, what emerging physicians can do in this space of innovation.
Absolutely. And one topic we do like to focus on is innovation in healthcare, and why, medical students should get involved in innovation. But we've noticed that there can be barriers at times for innovation in healthcare compared to other fields. So I was wondering how you think we can kind of overcome these barriers to innovation and improve our healthcare system efficiently.
Yeah. So, I mean, so let's first level set on what we mean by innovation, right? It's not technology. It's not shiny new things. It's only new things that it's got to have 3 parts. It's new or way, way, way better than whatever the standard of care was or the status quo. 1. Part 2, it has to be way better. So I often say, if whatever this new thing isn't 5 times, like 5x better than the standard of care, you're not in innovation, you're in quality improvement. Your methods are completely different, right? And so it could be 5x of 4 of the variables we use as our, KPIs of healthcare, better clinical outcomes, of course, better patient experience, better staff experience. That's a completely legitimate reason to do it, or lower cost. And the best ones do all four of those, to some extent, maybe not all 4 or 5x. So that's the second requirement, tick. The third, though, so it could be completely new, maybe a model of care that leverages technology. In a clinical trial or some way you've evaluated it in a safe environment, it shows it has the potential to deliver 5x. You are not declaring it an innovation. Until now, it's just an invention until it's been adopted at scale, adopted to a meaningful extent. That value has to be unlocked from the system to declare, a slam dunk innovation. And that's where we fall down. We actually don't have a problem inventing. We don't have a problem evaluating and showing value. We totally fail at adopting at scale. And why? At the heart of, and scale, by the way, we don't mean 100%, let's say clinicians doing the new thing or patients. We don't mean 80%. We mean like 33%, 1/3 up the adoption curve, and you're now at scale. And then everything just tips over eventually. So it's getting that first 1/3. Why? At the end of the day, what innovation is taking the old, blowing it up, putting it back together to unlock this new value, the old processes, people, data, whatever you're doing. Well, then value pools shift. Right? If new outcomes are going to be created and less cost, well, something has to leave. Something has to go out to allow that new thing. And people don't like to lose, right? Patients always win when a health innovation is successful. But a clinician or a hospital or a home care agency that now that thing they were doing for 100 years and they had it locked up, guaranteed budget, is going away because there's a better way to do it. Well, they're not going to let that go very easily. And even if they wanted to, dismantling all the old, because we usually in healthcare love to create entire institutions around ways of doing things. We had an entire agency of government in Ontario just for this thing called telemedicine. It's like having a department for email or department for fax. Like what? So it's hard to undo things. So all that kind of comes together of why it's so hard. There's just massive inertia to protect the status quo. And it's not evil people saying, I want to protect the status quo. That's not how we work. But man, the odds are stacked against you. So we can unpack a lot more. But at the end of the day, that's what it is. Value pool shift, and people do not take to that very lightly.
For sure. I could definitely see how, gaining that inertia to overcome these systems that are so entrenched would be so difficult. And it's great that you're pushing it forward. So the theme of your presentation at the Delta conference was alternative career paths that physicians may pursue. And some of our audience members may not have a great understanding of what those career paths may entail. So would you be able to provide us with some examples of how physicians are pursuing more interdisciplinary careers?
Yeah, so much like I said, there's this trajectory of, everyone started building a chief innovation officer and an innovation practice, et cetera. I think there's the same pattern happening now with the health workforce, whether it's physicians or nurses or physiotherapists, where, the old model was, you got trained as you go through medical school and your residency that, you could just, be a great physician and do your thing. And move up the ladder if you want to, just based on accumulated experience, wisdom, knowledge, expertise, blah, blah, blah. Then they did a little bit of training you on management, so you could become an administrator, where like your holy grail was to be the CEO of, an organization or a department chair or something like that. And that's kind of old school management methods, really designed for a different era of medicine, which was very industrialized. But people would take that path, and you could do an MD, MBA, and things like that. And then there was one other stream that was, the diehards did it, called clinician scientists, where, you could do a PhD and, have a parallel career of advancing research while being a scientist. And all of those were legitimized tracks, right? There was methods around them. Nobody, you didn't have to hide it when you wanted to do those things because they were just kind of normal. And then in the drinking water, there started to be these docs who are like, no, I want to have my biggest impact on patients by actually creating, net new models of care and unlocking new value, i.e. innovation. And there's a lot of ways you can, go down that path, but that was not a legitimized path. And I would say, and that was a bit of the theme of my talk, is there are now these ways and these patterns that are either docs are just figuring out on their own because they're not going to wait for, let's say, their medical school to get their act together, or more and more, whatever's your unit, the health system, a hospital, a school, is actually creating these paths. And so, one very popular one, I'll just give a couple examples and then we can go deep on some of them if you want. One is clinical entrepreneurship, this idea of the person who's closest to the patient could be the best authority on a new, usually technology-based offering. That could be a medical device, it could be a digital health tool or something. How do you, train that physician or nurse or whoever to actually become the founder of a tech startup, that scales? Because they have a lot of credibility and a lot of access. So the National Health Service, for example, in the UK, has literally created a NHS clinical entrepreneurship track that a trainee, maybe at the residency stage or whatever, can apply and get in, and you get wrapped around you to actually build a company and scale it. But the time off you need to take to do that is above the board. It's not like on Friday nights at midnight when you've done all your other work. And other ways like that. There's a Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, SOPE, which has chapters all over the world. They just launched a Toronto chapter last summer, for example, or an Ontario chapter. And Stanford has a great program you could do if you're a doctor and you want to kind of learn how to start a startup. The other is to actually just get involved with a startup or an innovation team, maybe at your hospital or something like that, hackathons. So you don't have to lead it, you don't have to start it, you don't have to ditch your career, but you do a day a week, maybe as the chief medical officer of a startup that you think is going to change the game for patients and scale successfully. Or you do, a day a week, as the clinical innovation lead of your in-house innovation team or something like that. Or you get on a project or you do hackathons. So you kind of moonlight and then you find what you like and then you flip over. It becomes that your clinical work becomes the minor and then your major becomes this innovation work. So those are some of the paths that, we're seeing a lot more. And then I'd say the last one that emerged coming out of COVID, thinking of the business of medicine, every organization in the world has become a healthcare organization, right? They've all had to figure out, methodologies around keeping their people safe, their patrons safe, their customers, and anybody in their supply chain safe. And they can't do that with their, in-house, whatever safety officers. They're all hiring doctors or nurses to come on and, be at the C-suite, at the executive level, where every decision the company is making is now being made through a medical safety lens. And that's unheard of, I'd say, until now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think within medical education, most, if not all, the focus is on the clinical aspects of medicine, which obviously is the most important part is the patients. But there's not a lot of education around some of these alternative career paths. And maybe that's because it's more of a fairly recent transition within healthcare. But I was wondering if you could explain more about why it's important for physicians to pursue some of these alternative career paths and maybe how this can help break down some of these barriers in innovation and really providing more value to new startups and new innovations in medicine.
So, why is it important? I don't think it's for everybody. First of all, most people think that, take any population of 100% of whatever, of an org, about 10% of the time people should be working on innovation work, whether that's, a weighted average across everybody or 10% of the people, it doesn't matter. So it's not for everybody, let's be clear. But innovation is healthcare's unfinished business. Like the only way we're going to get out of the massive inability to pay for the demand for services we have right now, the burnout, the terrible patient outcomes in a lot of dimensions, the friction, the waste, the 30% inefficiency of healthcare, right? All of that. We can't quality improve ourselves to that, right? Because quality improvement assumes what we're doing is actually right. We just need to get it to match what the clinical standard is. No. Innovation says actually we shouldn't be doing that. We should be doing a completely different thing. So it is now the imperative at every level, system, org, and then, department and individual. So you got to figure it out or not. Like, just like you needed to know safety, you needed to know informatics or tech, and you needed to figure out EQ, you needed to figure out quality. Like all those are just, yes, you need to do your clinical, but you need to do these. Innovation is the new one. I'd say it's arrived. So one, you have to. So better to be driving the bus or at least on the bus than sitting at the bus stop and the bus is going by and you're still practicing legacy, practices. I think the second reason though, why most of the physicians I meet are chomping at the bits to get into this space is medicine's a calling, right? It's not a business. You do this, you chose this profession to impact lives. And you could wake up every day and see, I don't know, 10 patients in a day, and that's your impact. Or you could help scale a high growth digital health company that impacts 1 million people every day. What do you think? So I think, or you could work on the innovation team in your health system or your hospital or your nursing home or wherever you work, and work on debottlenecking all the things that make it impossible for people to show up and do great work every day, and imagine your impact. So that's what I'm finding it is. It's obviously not for lucrative money, let's be clear, because very few, things actually get implemented. So that's what I find. And, a lot of people want to do this, but they don't know how, they don't know where to start. They've got debt. They don't think their boss or whatever will let them, we have some very traditional thinking still. And so they do it kind of on the side. I always say it's like Dead Poet Society. Like they're in a cave. You guys might not know this movie. It's from the 90s. You guys can watch it, but they're like in a cave reading poetry to each other because they weren't allowed to do that in school. And now I'm just saying it's emerging. And I'd say certain medical schools, certain cities, certain health jurisdictions are being much more aggressive leaders in breeding health innovators among clinicians, and then others that are still kind of really stuck in the old ways.
And now a word from our sponsor. This podcast is sponsored by OMA Insurance, the exclusive provider for the OMSA and the CFMS. Well over half of the medical students in Ontario choose and trust OMA Insurance because they are a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ontario Medical Association. As a not-for-profit and using the group buying power of well over half of Ontario physicians, OMA Insurance provides a wide range of insurance and retirement savings solutions for medical students, residents, and physician members. They have non-commissioned staff who offer objective advice, education, and solutions. OMA Insurance can help you prepare for the unexpected and help get you back on your feet when you need it the most. For instance, did you know that if you take more than 6 weeks off of medical school, you have to restart the year again? And if you're off for 6 months straight, the bank can start to ask for repayment on your line of credit. I personally have disability coverage with OMA Insurance. I got it because school is stressful enough, and I believe it can help keep me and my finances safe during times of uncertainty. Plus, it's affordable and super easy to enroll. Make sure you're protected, because if the last 2 years has taught us anything, it's that life can be very uncertain. OMA Insurance is there to protect you every step of the way. Go to omainsurance.com to learn more about our special offer and exclusive savings for students. Do you think there was a certain reason why this transition happened to really focus more on physicians pursuing some of these alternative paths as opposed to some of the more classic just clinical medicine or research scientists? Do you think there was a reason for this big change?
So I'd say that there's three big forces that are either pulling us to a very different paradigm of medicine that really hasn't changed in 150 years, right? The paradigm since the dawn of medicine has been very system focused, right? Really, we're optimizing around us, around our payers, our clinicians, our buildings, our hospitals, our this and that. And the new paradigm is actually obsessed about patients. It's starting over and redesigning everything for their outcomes but more patients. And that's a very different way. So there's a whole redo that needs to happen. The second is where patients have woken up. Like they're demanding a very, very different experience than certainly what their parents had or their grandparents. And they're not going to take what we're dishing. Like the other day, my son had to see a specialist. They wanted us to come in person. It was like his 5th day of school. I said, no, we're not driving to Markham from downtown. No. And it's not a thing that needed a physical. So I'm like, no, we're doing it virtual. Okay. And then I'm like, I'm not walking to his school, getting him, walking home, getting on the thing, and then walking him back, So we did it in the schoolyard. Well, guess how long we sat there waiting for the doctor? 45 minutes, right? He could have been at school. I could have been working. All the kids in the schoolyard were like looking at us, wondering what's happening. That's unacceptable in the 21st century. I'm sorry, right? So patients are demanding a very different experience. And if you can't offer it, the days are done where we're stuck with it. There are some cases where you're stuck, but not really. You can go elsewhere now, and it doesn't have to be in the same city. So patients are pulling us to the future, whether we want to or not. And the last big reason, the number one reason, is we're out of money. like the business model of healthcare no longer serves. Well, in the business world, when your business model no longer works, that's Sears closing down its last store last week. That's Blockbuster, that's network television. When it no longer works, you either reinvent your business model or you go out of business. Like, there's nothing in between. You can't keep running a suboptimal business model and expect it to work for your staff or your customers. So that's the ultimate imperative, to be honest. We do not have the ability to keep financing our healthcare system the way we're doing it now. And the only answer is, obviously the Ontario health system can't go out of business, but what's the answer? We ration. We delist, we don't fund, we make people wait 1.5 years for hip surgery. We make older adults wait 167 days to get into a nursing home, and they usually die before that happens. Well, that's rationing. And again, patients aren't going to tolerate it. So the point is, you got to get in now and be part of creating that future. And why clinicians in particular, I'd say clinicians and nurses are the biggest focus of programs around this is, they have a ton of power. You just do. So why wouldn't you take advantage of that power and use it, to do some amazing things? Whereas if I was, a data analyst in, a clinical setting, I don't have as much power. Right? I see the data every day. I know what needs to happen, but I don't have the power. So it's really, I think, a major responsibility actually to lead innovation.
And I like how you compared it to just, Blockbuster, Sears, because I think a lot of people don't think of healthcare that way. I think not thinking of it as a business, you're not thinking that, we need to keep innovating. We need to make sure the patient experience improves from what it has been, rather than status quo. It's just we serve the patient and that's kind of it. It's really, that's why businesses fail, when they're not adapting to the times. And
yeah, in our world, in the business world, of course, if you don't adapt, your business fails because your shareholders give up on you and they're not going to get their investment. In our case, our shareholders are called our citizens. And if they can't get care that's good quality when they need it, where they need it, that's a failure of the business, right? So you kind of have to do it. If you're in the mission business, which we all are, that's mission, so it's still the same motive.
And it really emphasizes the fact that physicians, have such powerful voices and really need to step up in this avenue, and really makes the case for why it's important to support physician innovation, and really advocating for some of these better healthcare efficiency and improvement.
Yep.
You mentioned, Dr. Khayat, that innovation in healthcare isn't really for everyone. So to our listeners out there who may be kind of on the fence about dipping their toes into innovation, what kind of personality types do you think thrive in innovation in healthcare?
I think there's a few, but the ones that I've seen, particularly from the physician ranks, who I think are just perfect for it and just fits right and feels right, is there's one that's around like really that inventor type that really sees a very different way to do things. And they've got the wherewithal, from whatever reason, creativity, experience, to design that new thing. So for example, at Sunnybrook Hospital, in Toronto, this crop of physicians, they've just got a culture around designing new medical devices, like a very different way to do, lumpectomy in breast cancer, or to do, different, imaging based kind of medical device procedures. It's just a center of excellence for that. So they've now built a center there called Medivations, which will take a physician. Usually they tend to be in the cancer space, sometimes radiology or cardiology. And, they have an idea for a better way because they're using these instruments every day, right? But you need to understand physics and science and engineering. So that bit of that engineering kind of mind. So that's when you're kind of becoming more of a product innovator, I'd say. I think the other breed that I see are more of, they just, they live in the 21st century and everything else in their life, like they took an Uber to get to work. They ordered whatever they needed on Amazon. They understand that to communicate with, I don't know, anybody else in their life, they figure out what the right mix of in-person versus asynchronous texting versus, live phone, or, that's how they live and do all their other communication. And so they're like, what the hell? Why am I in the 19th century when I'm here in healthcare? And so that's another breed that just, it's actually feel like it's unethical, the amount of waste and how much information drops because the terrible, terrible infrastructure to communicate in healthcare, and they're just not going to take it. They're going to fix it. So they tend to aggregate towards digital type solutions that just take the friction out of, frankly, in my opinion, just moving information around. And then the third are more going to bust it at the system level, right? That's like a Dr. Sasha Bhatia, one of my favorite cardiologists, that's now like the chief medical information officer of the entire Ontario health system, where they understand policy, they understand system change, and they've got a bit of a personality that loves to connect the dots and convene and see how, it's kind of like systems thinking, right? Or we call it integrative thinking. They can do that because they've got the mental capacity, but they can go right deep into their clinical stuff on the next day too and see their patients. You know what I mean? So those are kind of some of the topology and ecology, I'd say, of some of the physician entrepreneurs or innovators that I've been meeting.
Thank you. I like how you kind of broke it down to three distinct buckets there. And one thing we like to do is empower medical students to feel like they should pursue these alternative career paths in innovation. So I was wondering if there are ways that they can get more exposure in the space, more interdisciplinary work in medicine.
So I'll just give a few examples. Imagine there's like a maturity model. So while you're still in school, and this is again me looking at the people like you guys that I've been interacting with all over the world, if you don't have the infrastructure already in your own medical school, and I know most don't, but some do, some are way ahead. So for example, at the medical school I worked at in the Netherlands, we had 450 med students every year. We were changing the curriculum because of digital every 6 months. Okay. I tried to change the curriculum in the Canadian medical school. It took like years and we got nowhere. So, because it obsolesces so fast. So anyway, so if you don't have that kind of infrastructure, then you got to figure it on your own. So I found, like for one medical school in Canada, the group of students were like, we think AI is going to be a game changer for our profession. And short answer is yes, it will. But no one in their medical school was talking about it, right? Like nobody. It would be in the curriculum. It was still very old school curriculum. So they formed like a little group that would get together every month and just chat about stuff, bring in somebody and just get them self-educated. And then this one med student that I was mentoring a lot, I spoke at this thing once, and then we stayed in touch. Then he went and did a fellowship with one of the top AI and healthcare, professors, so he could be, work on that instead of a different type of research, right? And then, I teach my course, my health and innovation course, which, if you're a student at University of Toronto, you can get in no matter what department you're in, although it's for the MBA. I let this medical student in. It was my first time having and we had to go through a shitload of paperwork to let it happen because they didn't want to let him. He would have to miss like 1 hour of class once. I'm like, dude, you're coming in. So anyway, you go find it. The other way I see a lot of docs, the easiest way to dabble is go online, go to hackinghealth.ca. It's a hackathon infrastructure started out of Canada by Luc Sirois. It's now in 50 some countries. Just do a hackathon, 3 days. You show up, you get put on a team, or you could pitch a problem. And by the Sunday, Friday to Sunday, you've literally designed a solution, a prototype that works, an app or some kind of a new prototype. And you can sometimes form a company out of that, form a team, but you just get exposed in a pretty low risk way. Case competitions, those kinds of things. And then just dabbling and going to talks, listening to podcasts like Mars in Toronto has Health Innovation Week. Just listen to stuff and see stuff, Singularity University, because you're not going to get inspired by the people in your own backyard. It's just not how it works in Canada. So that's the light version. The next version is, like I said, Moonlight, a day a week, a day a month, with a startup, with a health innovation team, with, some kind of an organization that's in this space. So like they have all the infrastructure. You're just kind of piggybacking and bringing value. And then you can dial up or down how much more you want to do or don't do. If you you moonlight with a radiology startup and you're like, oh, I don't like this at all, quit them and go to another one, And then again, the final one is actually making the leap. Being the clinical lead of innovation at your, health org or starting a startup. And usually for those, you're still doing your clinic 3-4 days a week. And then you're doing this other stuff, 1 or 2 days a week or a month or something like that. So those are just hopefully some patterns you can consider.
Awesome. Thank you. So really taking that initiative and looking for opportunities out there. And
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just one other thing, the Canadian Medical Association, they have a whole, which when you guys become docs, you will pay into nationally. They have a whole subsidiary called Joule, Joule, which is just their whole ethos it was created to enable docs to become innovators. They can give you money, support. So, the infrastructure I think is getting better and better to support you on this path.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you for providing some tangible ways that students can actually get involved and get more information for innovation. That's actually something Brandon and I wanted to do at Western, trying to get a startup partnership where medical students can shadow for a day a week or a day a month with local startups and in healthcare. And I think that would be a really great opportunity to get some tangible skills and just see what starting a startup entails and all of that.
Yep. And it doesn't have to be local, like, the Creative Destruction Lab, which is an accelerator here, at U of T, but it's international. They've got labs all over Canada and the world. That's part of the curriculum, right? Students can come in and work with a startup, and it's very formalized. So it's great if it's local, but it doesn't have to be, lots of opportunities.
For sure. And now we're approaching the 40-minute mark. So I just want to leave the floor open, allow you to have an opportunity to share any additional thoughts or pieces of advice for medical students before we conclude the podcast.
I mean, there's so much I could say. If I just reflect on some of what I hear a lot when I meet with physicians, in this kind of space, a few things come to mind. Unfortunately, you will not be able to be a good clinician if you just stick to your clinical expertise, and that's already really hard. You guys know that. and I don't know that your academic institution is going to catch up with the times, because they tend to lag 20-ish years on things like digital and some of these other capabilities I'm talking about. So, just be smart about, why are you in this field, and what is the collection of capabilities and competencies you need to achieve the impact you want. And, clinical is just one of them. It's table stakes. But, as we talked about, I think there's your IQ of your clinical, there's your EQ, which I think you get a lot of good training on. That's fine. Now your TQ, your technology quotient, is a no-brainer. And I think your generation, you're these kind of digital natives. You've also grown up playing video games. It shouldn't be a problem. But unfortunately, your medical training is not going to show you that stuff as much. So you still have to stay on the edge of that and challenge the status quo of, where are we being physical and analog when we really don't need to be? Where are we asking humans to make predictions and decisions when a machine could do way, way better and faster than we are? Challenge it. And then there's these other competencies I'm talking about around innovation. I think systems change is key, policy, and the one that's growing, particularly in your profession, is social justice, right? When the reason your patient is the way they are, whatever is their, dysfunction, is because the postal code they were born in, which, is linked to the color of their skin, their literacy, their educational context, the trauma they've been exposed to. You could be the best clinician in the world. If you don't figure out how to deal with that root cause, you're not actually doing good medicine. And so that's a bit scary. I've just told you you'd be great at clinician, great at tech, great at EQ, innovation, system change, policy, social justice. And the answer is, yeah, you do. And I think that's the awakening I think your profession has to have, of it is not like it used to be, where there's this lone expert who gets all this training and is like the most important decision maker. It's a team-based model now. There's a ton of humility. There's a ton of humbleness and an openness to really learning and understanding from everybody surrounding the patient. Formal care providers and informal care providers. And that's, you're going against a current of medical education that hasn't yet caught up with that fast enough. So I don't know if I've scared you, but if you feel that, I'm just saying, wade into it. It's the right feeling, and keep pushing, and you'll be better on the other side.
Very well put. I think it's important really to learn about some of these things aside from the clinical practice and really embrace it. I think not to be scared. It's what you entered in the field of medicine, and really embracing these things will help advance the field and do better for our patients in the future.
And I honestly believe it will give you a lot more joy and feel like you're living your purpose a lot more every day, because you're not on the surface. You're getting in deep to really why are people the way they are, and their medical, physical needs is only a little drop of that, right? Just what it is. So
Yeah, I totally agree. We encourage our listeners to identify ways to learn more about these opportunities. So we'll attach some of the links that Dr. Khayat provided in the podcast description. And I'd just like to thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. I know Brandon and I both learned a ton of information, and I know our audience is going to really appreciate this episode. So thank you to our listeners for joining in. If you have any questions or show ideas, you can email us at businessinmedicinepodcast@gmail.com. Please follow us on Facebook, Business in Medicine Podcast. If you're interested in purchasing a copy of Dr. Khayat's book, The Future of Aging, we'll also link it in the description notes, as well as the SE Futures website to learn more about current projects that their team is working on. We'll also put in the link for Hacking Health and the Jewel program that the CMA provides as well to reference for our listeners. So again, thank you very much for your time, and we wish you best of luck on your future endeavors.
thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Brandon. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Dr. Khayat.
Take care.